Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. Today we're painting two of the most iconic castles in the history of tabletop gaming. In the process, we'll talk about a menu of effective painting techniques for stone walls. We'll build a custom paint plan to fit the vibe of each castle. You know it's gonna be a big project when I pull the folding tables out onto the lawn. It's gonna be messy, it's gonna be fun, and it'll be a nice break from painting minis. There are lots of model castles out there on the market. Some are mass-produced and some are 3D printed. There are also a lot of kids' toys that would look great with a repaint. Or you could even make your own citadel out of foam. The two castles I have here are classics. The light-colored resin models are from Tabletop World, and the blue-gray segments are a used set of the plastic fortress kit from Warhammer Fantasy Battles. The previous owner did an okay job of painting them, but the sections were all slightly different shades, so I wanted to give them a fresh coat of paint. It was sunny, and I got started with some rattle can primer. For terrain, I'm willing to roll the dice a bit more with old half cans of primer, cheap cans of primer, and brands that I've never tried before. On miniatures, you need to make sure that you don't mess up the details on the faces. On stone walls, the worst case scenario is that some rocks will get a bit more bumpy. I've got cans of black, tan, and gray. The tan is for sections of the gatehouse that are wood and stucco. The black and the gray are for the stonework. I started with an all-over coat of black. After that first coat, I flipped everything upside down and hit him with black again. I'm doing my best to get into all the cracks and the underside of things. I am unreasonably excited about this project. Castles are awesome. They rank right up there with dinosaurs and pirates and spaceships. Castles are just inherently cool, and every kid knows it. So black is a fine color for rocks. It's okay if a bit of black primer is still visible in the final paint job, but I definitely want to make sure that all of the bare resin is covered. Next comes the gray primer. I'm doing this as a single coat with the buildings oriented right side up. I'm aiming for good coverage, but we don't need 100% coverage. Transitions between the spray paint colors will give us a continuum of different shades of gray. Rocks can naturally have a ton of variety. Many of the steps in this project are about adding random variation that looks natural and is visually interesting. As a side note, you can do a lot more with rattle cans than just black and gray. In a previous project, I used red, green, tan, and gray to really start things off with some neat color transitions. Using multiple colors like this is a fast way to add a ton of depth and character to those rocks. The downside to this approach is that it's harder to predict what the outcome will look like, and it might be difficult to repeat if I decided to expand on this collection someday. The advantage to the simple black and gray is that this will be easier to replicate if the day comes that I put an addition onto one of these castles. Okay, the spray painting is complete. Let's bring him inside. So the gray is fine, but I do want to add some color. For the next step, I'm going to do some sponging. I picked out 5 colors. These bottles are from an old line of paint that I don't use anymore, but they're good enough for terrain. I moistened a bit of sponge, and then I used it to randomly add dabs of color. I started with a grayish blue, then a desaturated green, then a light brown, then a dark brown, and then a black brown. At first, this might look out of place, but I've learned to trust the process. This is controlled chaos. As we layer on more and more colors, it's gonna look more and more natural. We'll use some other tricks to blend everything together later on. Painting terrain doesn't require much skill. You just need to make a plan and follow through. It doesn't even have to be a good plan. There are tons of right ways to do this, and no wrong ways. There are plenty of methods we could use to add splotches of color to the rocks. We could use an airbrush or a regular paintbrush, but I'm liking this sponge because it's cheap and easy. The messiness of this step helps to create some random, natural-looking patterns. Some of this is representing different veins of minerals in the rocks, and some of this is representing the dirt, moss, and discoloration that builds up over time. This variety of depth and color is helping to make this look cool. I've got some more stuff planned, but this is already a great backdrop for minis. Of course, we want this castle to look great, but it's the big picture that matters. We don't need to stress about individual stones. We gotta remember to zoom out and look at the whole scene. I used the same sponging technique on the Warhammer Siege Fortress. From here on out, I'm going to take the two castles in different directions. There's a whole menu of messy weathering techniques that we can use to really give these castles some character. My next choice on this Warhammer Siege Fortress is a white dry brush. I could have used a tan or a light gray or even a progression of different dry brush colors, but I was feeling bold. Let's jump straight to white, save some time, and get some exciting contrast on there. I've got a big cheap makeup brush and I am going for it. I'm making circular motions all over this castle. The dry brush does several things at once. It picks out the edges of bricks and adds definition. It also helps to unify the colors that we sponged on. If a splotch of brown or green was a bit too bold, the white dry brush all over everything will help to blend them together and make them look natural. Of course, the white dry brush will also make the whole castle lighter and brighter. We also might end up with a bit of chalkiness or even brush strokes if I'm not careful. Here's the before and after of the dry brush step. You can see what I mean about blending the colors together and unifying things a bit. Okay, there's one more step that I want to do to this castle. An oil wash. I've got a salsa jar, mineral spirits, black oil paint, brown oil paint, and an old brush. The goal is to make a black-brown brew that'll flow well. It should be just thick enough that when I shake it up, it'll darken the sides of the glass for a few seconds. I got something that I liked, and I took it outside. This is another fun, messy step that does a lot of things all at once. It flows into the deep spaces to add contrast and define the shapes of those bricks. It helps to unify the different colors. It can also hide the chalkiness or brush strokes that might have been added by my dry brush. And of course, it'll darken everything by a few shades. The nice thing about oil washes is that it's easy to prevent the flat areas and the high points from becoming too dark. I put some mineral spirits on a shop towel and I wiped the high points to brighten them back up a bit. After the organic solvents dried, this castle was looking pretty good. Dry brushing and oil washes are effective steps, but they are a bit boring. I've got a different strategy for the Tabletop World castle, and it revolves around grout. This is unsanded grout from the hardware store. You can get it in different colors, so I mixed up some white and brown and gray to get a tan color that I like. We're essentially using cement as a cheap weathering pigment. This will look great as mortar in between the bricks. I'm using a big brush to dab this powder deep into the cracks on that stonework. This technique will not work for every castle wall. Terrain pieces from Tabletop World have some unusually deep cracks in the rockwork that the powder can settle into. Since the grout technique is viable for this castle, I figured it'd be a shame not to use it. Now once the powder is in the cracks, I hit everything with a squirt bottle to activate the cement so that it would really harden up and stay in place. I flicked the excess water off of the walls and left them to dry in the sun. This is another one of those messy, trust the process kind of situations. When they're dry, the segments look something like this. I used a stiff brush to clean off some of the excess powder that ended up on the surface of the rockwork. Castles can certainly look like this, but it was just a bit too dusty for my taste. Here's one stone tower that still has grout all over everything, next to a tower that I brushed off a bit. And here are sections of the wall before and after adding grout. The net result is that everything looks lighter and more weathered. What I think is really cool though is that the spaces between the bricks are a lighter color than the stones themselves. This is neat because the most common terrain painting techniques do the opposite. On the Warhammer Siege Castle, the spaces between the stones are dark. It's a cool look, but it doesn't necessarily look like mortar. Washes darken the crevices and dry brushing lightens the high points, but adding tan grout into the crevices gives us a light-colored mortar in between the stones. Oh, as a side point, I used a dirty tan-colored grout, but in context there on the wall, it looks surprisingly white. In general, I find that off-white colors are much more useful than pure white. They just fit better and they aren't as jarring to the eye. Of course, I am willing to use a bit of pure white for a light dry brush over the stones. I don't think this step is necessary, but the texture on the rockwork is so good that I'd feel bad if I didn't pick it out just a teeny bit with a dry brush. These resin cast stones have a sharpness to them, and it picks up dry brushing really well. This wall has more going on other than just the stonework. We've got to find a way to paint this gatehouse. Oh, Oh yeah, that'll do it. Not bad at all. The stucco is bone colored, and the shingles are a deep blue with a light blue dry brush. These walls have some timbers running through them, and even some windows on the inner face. For the first time, we've got to pull out a paintbrush and be deliberate with it. These careful straight lines make the controlled chaos of the stonework seem intentional. A dark wash on the timber gives it just enough definition. This is all coming together, and it's looking right. Okie dokie, let's line it up. I'm a bit nervous about this because some of the segments turned out a teeny bit darker and some turned out a teeny bit lighter. But if there are any bad mismatches, I can use a white dry brush to blend things together, or I can add a drop of dark wash to hide the brightest spots of grout. But hey, this is looking good. I'm happy. Medieval castles are every bit as cool as dinosaurs and ninjas. Working on terrain is always a nice little break from painting minis, and when you're done, you have an awesome backdrop. This mini was just hanging around, but now he's just hanging around in a castle. How cool is that? Painting terrain can seem messy and random, but there's really no wrong way to do it. It's refreshing. There are lots of great techniques that you can try. You can mix and match and experiment, and you might be surprised by how well it all comes together. Alrighty, that's all I've got for today. Thanks so much for watching.